Hi guys. I originally started Dru Talks because I've been stuck in lockdown and I needed something to do with my time. And I noticed that the world had, there were just a few perspectives being shared. And I felt like I had something to say. Hadn't planned on making it 100% political. But I do like to talk about politics a lot. So it's kind of evolved into a heavy on the politics. I can't promise it's always going to be like that. But I wanted to give you guys a chance to hear the backstory of how I got to kind of think the way I do along the political spectrum. I grew up Republican. In fact, I remember a really funny story. As I was a kid, my parents were having a discussion and my mom said to my dad, "Well, your parents voted Democrat." And my dad was all affronted and he's like, "That was for Carter." It's kind of a funny story, but it's just kind of the way I grew up. It was an agriculture family, so we were in a rural area. We were Republican. And then when I was in high school, 9/11 happened, and the whole world changed for America. We had no idea. For a lot of us, it just came out of nowhere. Like one day we're just going about our business, and the next day we discover some guys had some elaborate plan to kill thousands of Americans. And I was in high school, so I wasn't thinking about the world stage. But because of that, it kind of stirred up a ton of patriotism, nationalism during that time. And I remember we marched into Afghanistan, and then a few years later, we were told that we needed to go into Iraq. And it was considered almost unpatriotic to question that. And we were told, well, on that part of the world, they just all hate us because we're wealthy and free and Christian, and it bothers them so much that they're coming over here to kill us, or they're going to. And that Saddam Hussein has these weapons of mass destruction, and he's gonna take us out. And I remember, I was very young, and I remember feeling incredible anger at anyone who spoke out about going to Iraq. I thought they hated soldiers. I thought that they were just naive and dumb, that they hated America, that they were disrespecting everything we stood for. And in my head, going into Iraq meant liberating Iraq. I believed that the Iraqi people were slaves to Saddam Hussein, and when we marched in there, they were just going to be so excited that we saved them and brought them democracy, and we should just spread democracy to the world. And that was what I believed. And then as time went on and we did march into Iraq, there were no weapons of mass destruction. And more and more stuff began to be revealed. WikiLeaks came out. They talked about some of the things that were happening at Guantanamo Bay, and just a lot of ugly things. And I had always thought of America as the hero, and to see some of these ugly things that were happening, and then to hear that, it's hard to get the numbers, but they said maybe 1 million Iraqis had died during that war. And that's a lot of people. And looking back, I remember when we bombed Iraq for the first time, I was excited. I was like, yeah, this is exciting. I felt patriotic. And then as things just started to evolve, it became like I started to gather some sort of apathy towards it all. We had been lied to, and there weren't any weapons of mass destruction. And It doesn't mean Saddam Hussein was a good guy. He wasn't. But the initial reasons we went in were not the case. And so I just kind of withdrew from politics. I was ashamed. I felt duped. And I just kind of thought like, my voice doesn't matter at all. What I have to say, I'm just one in 330 million people in this country. Why would they even listen to me? I don't know what I'm talking about. And so I remember having so much apathy towards the political process that the year Obama and McCain ran against each other, I still voted, but I remember the night before, was the first time I looked at the candidates. I was so disgusted with the whole process. I ended up voting for McCain just because he was a POW, and I thought that maybe being a POW, he would have a different perspective on the world and how to treat, maybe because he'd been tortured, he wouldn't want to do that to somebody else kind of thing. And I remember talking with a girl from work who was a friend of mine, and she's like, well, who did you vote for? And I'm like, McCain. And I was like, well, who did you? And she said, oh, I voted for Obama because I'm pro-choice. I mean, we really didn't. It was like, what are you going to do? These are our picks. Well, the following election, the next 4 years, somebody sent me a video for a candidate that was running, and it wasn't so much the candidacy that interested me, but it was like talking about our foreign policy. And it talked about the history in Afghanistan, how we had trained some of these Afghani, what we consider terrorists now, to fight the Russians. Also our dealings with Saudi Arabia, our past dealings with Iran, and even our past dealings with Saddam Hussein. And suddenly the explanation of, well, all this is happening because we're rich and they're poor, and we're Christian and they're Muslim, and we're free and they're not, kind of seemed like a juvenile explanation. Suddenly hearing some of the history behind all of it, and how our foreign policy is not patriotic, it really made me stop to think, what are we doing? And I'm not having a naive view of the world, just saying we're all going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but I suddenly realized that there were more than one viewpoint than just America is right and everyone else that we're fighting against is wrong. And again, a lot of these guys that we are going up against are not good people, but how our foreign policy has just caught us in this circle of never-ending perpetual war to prevent war. And just the ridiculousness of this cycle. And for a long time, I never wanted to question our foreign policy, because I thought if I questioned our foreign policy, I would be dishonoring the troops, which is something I never wanted to do. And I finally realized that there were a lot of veterans that were speaking out about our foreign policy, how we were putting our sons and daughters in harm's way as a political game. And that really was freeing for me to realize I could speak out against the foreign policy and not be anti-troops, which is something I think the Vietnam protesters got wrong when they were really nasty to the Vietnam vets. You can protest the war and not want anything bad to happen to the troops. And so for me, foreign policy has become an incredible area of interest. And given now that I have explanations as to some of the history behind all of this, I feel better equipped to understand what is happening than just, well, it's just us versus them. The issues are way more complicated than that. And I now vote accordingly. And it changed me from being kind of a war hawk conservative to I actually don't belong to a political party now. I have lost a lot of respect for both political parties. For the Republicans who claim to be the pro-life party, I don't know how you can claim to be pro-life but also support candidates who say they're going to vote pro-life, but then they also are pretty flippant in like doing preventative wars and are pro-torture. How can you be pro-life but ignore the lives of other people on the other side of the planet? And then the Democratic Party has just been a big disappointment. They were the ones that protested the war in the Bush years. And I had a lot of Democrat teachers who, you know, they talked about civil liberties as far as like the prohibition laws. They talked about reforming the prison system, that kind of stuff. And then once Obama got in office, they all disappeared. Like he had a ton of wars and none of them protested. So I just kind of call hypocrisy on the whole thing. Since their smooth, swaggering guy was in office, they just let it all slide and, you know, oohed and awed over him. And where were they protesting? I mean, and now that we're into another president that also has the same foreign policy, they're not out again at all. So I don't even know what the Democratic Party stands for at this point, because I used to know what they stood for, very anti-war, and now both parties are very aggressive pro-war. So that's kind of been my political journey. It doesn't leave me with a lot of candidates to vote for, but that's okay, because I'd rather leave a line blank than vote for a candidate that is not upholding what is right and is simply just playing party politics. So there you go, little backstory on how I arrived where I did with politics. And you know, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Like the video, you can put a thumbs down if you want, or you can share it, or you can subscribe, up to you. Once again, I love hearing feedback. So anyway, thanks guys.